Welcome to what we hope is going to be an ongoing series of lectures on Jewish biblical heroines. With these classes, if I'm successful, I'm going to bring you back in time to meet these incredible women. I hope that you find the classes interesting and engaging, and maybe even sometimes a little bit entertaining, but that's not my main objective. Why did we specifically choose the topic of Jewish biblical heroines? Yes, the stories of these women are indeed fascinating. But the reason that I try to take you back in time to experience their life stories is because in the Torah, in the Bible, we've been given access to a gift, literally a treasure trove of wisdom and insight. The stories of these women, as with all stories in the Torah, are recorded for a reason. The selected details of these stories that are brought down in the Torah, if we take the time to learn them, will transmit to us a wisdom which can enrich our lives. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, alav shalom, once said as a rule, no one has stronger marriages, no one has a stronger sense of community than the Jews, and no one has the same sense of collective responsibility for every Jew all over the world. Because the teachings of the Torah infuse us with a moral code. A while ago, a colleague of mine from work pointed to a synagogue and he said to me, Mindy, I've been taking classes at that synagogue. I was a little surprised because I had thought he was an unaffiliated Jew in conversations we had had in the past. He didn't really seem interested in his Judaism. So I asked him, really, when did that start? And he told me that about 2 years ago, he found himself having to make a very important life decision. And he said he stopped and he said to himself, I kept thinking about you, Mindy, because you always seemed to have this moral compass that guided your decisions. And then I realized it wasn't you at all, Mindy. It was the Torah that guided your life. So I decided to take some classes, and it has literally changed my life. The reality is that the wisdom of the Torah spans the gamut, from how to build relationships with our spouses, how to raise our children with a sense of purpose, how to infuse our lives with meaning, and how to focus on what's really important during this short time that we're gifted with life. So today, if I'm successful, I'm going to bring you back in time to observe two incredible sisters, Rachel, Rachel, and Leah, who through the selected stories that are portrayed to us in the Torah will teach us life lessons that will blow our minds. Because as much as things have changed over the past 3,500 years, the inherent struggles in human nature haven't changed at all. So therefore, as the title of this class suggests, today we're going to learn that if there was ever a time to be jealous, and yet. So let us begin. Okay, who is stronger, man or woman? Well, many years ago, it was generally accepted that men are stronger than women. That's because many years ago, what was valued was physical strength, right? Women needed men to protect them from the elements. We needed men to protect us from the wild animals, to build us homes. Those were the days before contractors. Nowadays, I think what we value more is inner strength, much more than physical strength. What is true inner strength? Well, the most powerful display of inner strength is when one masters the ability to control their natural tendencies, their natural inclinations. The truth of the matter is that we're all born only with an evil inclination. As babies, we're selfish. We cry when we don't get what we want. We don't stop to think about others, whether it's bothering our parents that we're making so much noise. As parents, we teach our children as they grow to overcome those natural selfish tendencies. We teach them to share and to be kind and to think of others. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this storybook called Pinkalicious, but my children read it to their children, and there's a phrase in there that has always struck me as such an important phrase to teach children. We get what we get and we don't get upset. And although hopefully we learn these lessons as children, and therefore, when we grow, we learn to act properly in situations. As adults, in reality, we continually have to work on ourselves to fight that natural inclination to think of our own comfort. We have to fight the instinct to experience envy, when we're surrounded by people who have what we desperately crave and pray for, but have not yet been blessed with. And let's make a distinction here. I am not implying that we don't want others to have good. Of course we do. But the reality is that when we don't have something that we want, and no one around us has it either, it's a little bit easier. When you watch outside your window and you see all your neighbor's children playing outside, and you see her interacting and having so much fun with her children and having nachas from her children, as you wait year after year after year to have a child of your own, it's difficult. We have to fight our natural inclination to react with anger when someone spites us or harms us, or worse, harms one of our children. We have to fight our natural instinct to feel bitter or down when life deals us a difficult blow. And in reality, who can blame us? It's part of human nature to feel these things. But what determines ultimately what kind of people we are and how much strength of character we have, it's the effort that we put into summoning up that inner strength to overcome those natural feelings and make the difficult decisions and act appropriately. In doing so, we model proper behavior for our children. We become better people. We live up to our potential. We perfect our soul. And each time we make those difficult decisions to stretch out of our comfort zone, to do the right thing despite the discomfort, we grow. Does anyone know how a lobster grows? So it seems that a lobster has this hard shell, but every so often it goes to a quiet place somewhere in the ocean and it sheds its shell, and it's left vulnerable during that time. It's not protected. It doesn't have the hard shell. But what happens over time is that a new shell grows, and this shell is bigger, and the lobster learns to grow into that shell. Why would the lobster do this? Why make itself vulnerable? Because it knows that it cannot possibly grow unless it takes that time to be vulnerable, maybe even experience a little bit of pain because they're not protected from the outside elements. But ultimately, this is the way it can grow. In reality, the same is true for us. Sometimes it is actually our most painful experiences, those times when we are uncomfortable, that we take an opportunity to think of how we need to grow. Sometimes we need those painful situations to give us the impetus to grow as people. And as for women, what is one of the greatest challenges that we have? What kind of natural instinct do we have that is specifically, mostly a challenge for women? I would say whereas for a man, it's overcoming his instinctual pride and ego, because that presents him with a really big challenge. But for women, what's the most important thing to us? It's the need to be loved. For some, that translates into a desire to have a man take care of them. But even for the more independent woman, one of the most precious things is the need to feel valued, to feel appreciated, to be loved. I once read a widow who wrote that after she lost her husband, the most difficult thing for her was the realization that she was no longer the most important person to anyone in this world. And therefore, an intrinsic character trait that's often universally associated with women is the natural instinct to feel jealousy, especially when it comes to the people that we love. How ingrained in us is this desire? Well, this goes back literally to the first woman, to Chava, to Eve. Rashi tells us, why did Eve give Adam from the fruit to eat after she ate it? Because she said, if I am going to be punished and I am going to die, Adam is going to marry somebody else. Oh, no. Let me give him the fruit. And this way, if I die, then he dies also. So this is a natural instinct that we can literally trace back to the very beginning of time. And with this introduction, we are now ready to learn the story of Rachel and Leah and observe the incredible inner strength that these women had. We're first introduced to Rachel as Jacob, arrives in town when he's running away from a very difficult situation. Under his mother's guidance, he tricked his father into giving him the blessing that his father wanted to give to his brother. This story can just seem so uncomfortable. I mean, Yaakov, the good brother, our great forefather, I mean, he engages in this trickery, in this deception. It's just uncomfortable. I have a question. Why is the story written in the Torah? Even if it happened, we don't know every single detail of Yaakov's life. Why did Hashem choose to make this uncomfortable story so public? I have an even better question. Why did this even have to happen? I mean, we as the Jewish people, we take pride in our dedication to the truth and to honesty. It's considered a key godly trait that we spend our lives trying to emulate. God can do anything. If Yaakov was supposed to get the blessing of the older brother, why did God have to make it come about in such an uncomfortable way? We're going to get back to that. So let's join Yaakov as he arrives in town at the community well. Rachel is there with all the other shepherds. Where is Leah, her older sister? Why is the younger sister tending to the sheep? Well, it seems that when Rachel and Leah were born, Lavan, their father, arranged a match. He had a sister, Rivka, who had twins, as we know, Yaakov and Esav. And they decided that the older girl, Leah, would marry the older boy, Esav, and the younger boy, Yaakov, would marry the younger girl, Rachel. So what Leah used to do is she used to stand at the crossroads of town, and she used to wait when travelers would pass by. And she was curious, and she would say, "Hi, excuse me, have you ever heard of my intended? His name is Esav, the son of Yitzchak." And they would hem and haw and finally say, yes, we know him. You ever heard of Bin Laden? Yeah, that's pretty much what your husband-to-be is like. So Leah spent her childhood crying and praying that she would not end up married to this evil man. She cried so much that her eyes were swollen and her eyelashes fell out. So when she couldn't spend a lot of time outside because since her eyelashes fell out, she was not really protected from the sun. So Rachel was left to serve as the shepherdess for her father's flock. So meanwhile, back at the well, Yaakov, the younger of the twin boys, lifts the stone off of the well for the shepherds. And when he sees Rachel, he goes and he kisses her. And he starts to cry. He kisses her? What was that? Love at first sight? Absolutely not. This was something so much deeper. This was a spiritual connection that the two of them had. We are told that Yaakov cries when he kisses her because he sees that although he's going to end up married to her, he's not going to end up buried with her. And that makes him cry. They return home to Lavan's house, and after about a month, a deal is struck, and Yaakov is going to work for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. Because even though a match was made, Lavan said, "No, I'm going to get something out of this. You want my daughter? You're going to work for her." So, fast forward 7 years. The day of the wedding is approaching. Now, Rachel tipped off Yaakov about her father. Lavan was a trickster. Yeah, he deceived people. He was selfish. He got what he wanted, and he figured out ways to get what he wanted. So Rachel said, I think there's a chance that my father is going to switch me and Leah. So we need to protect ourselves. So Yaakov said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you secret signs that no one's going to know about. And at the wedding, you'll show me those secret signs or tell me those secret signs, and then I will know it is you, so we won't have a problem. Why did Lavan want to do the switch? Why did he care which daughter married Yaakov? Well, Lavan realized that he had a big problem. You know how you have the most fantastic cleaning lady, and she's been with you for 7 years, and she knows your house, she knows how you like things done, and you can trust her 100%. And not only that, she's been working to you for many years for free, which is great. But now she tells you that her contract is up and she thinks she's going to be moving on. Do you know that panic that you feel? Well, that's basically the panic that Lavan felt. I mean, he had Yaakov working for free. He was the best shepherd in town, and he had him for 7 years. And he knows that Yaakov loves Rachel, and that's the only reason he's sticking around. After he gets married to Rachel, he does not have any reason to stay in town. So Lavan has a problem. So what does he do? Smart guy. He calls a town meeting, all the people. He doesn't say, I have a problem. He says, we have a problem. Yaakov has been here for 7 years. Has anyone noticed that we've had an abundance of water from the well since he's been here? Because when a tzaddik comes to town, so the water was abundant for them. So he's going to marry my daughter and he's going to hightail it out of here. And then we're all going to be stuck. We're not going to have enough water. So I have a plan. Here's the plan. I am going to switch my daughters. I am going to switch Rachel and Leah. He's going to marry Leah. I know he loves Rachel. So he'll be willing to work another 7 years. I'll renegotiate the contract and we'll get him to stay longer. Mum's the word. Don't say anything at the wedding. So the day of the wedding arrives. And we don't have to worry because Rachel and Yaakov anticipated this, right? They have secret signs. So it doesn't matter that Lavan's going to try to switch Leah and Rachel. It's not going to work. The plot is going to fail. So the night of the wedding comes, and Yaakov gets married. And I wanted to read to you what happens next, straight from the Torah. It says, and it was morning, v'hinei Leah, and behold, it was Leah. Behold, it was Leah? How in the world did that happen? How could he not tell who it is that he married? Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that he was fooled because Rachel gave the secret signs to Leah. And I'm going to say to you, so? I still don't understand how he was fooled. Let's say I love my husband, which I do. And let's say I'm really bad at recognizing faces, which I am. And I say to my husband, here's the secret password. Israel is the homeland of the Jews. And my husband tells this to his brother. The secret password is Israel is the homeland of the Jews. And his brother comes over to me and says, Israel is the homeland of the Jews. I'm your husband. I'm going to look at him and say, who are you trying to kid? You're not my husband, even if you're wearing a veil on your head. I know my husband's voice. I know my husband's mannerisms. You're not my husband. So now you're going to say, well, you heard that Lavan hired the boys in town to go around the night of the wedding and put out all the lights. So it was dark, and Yaakov couldn't see clearly. And I'm going to say to you, really? Let's say, for argument's sake, that Rachel and Leah had they were the same height, the same body type. Let's say they even had the same color hair. Let's say she was wearing a veil, and it was a little bit dark. What about her voice? Doesn't he know what she sounds like? How could he not tell that it wasn't Rachel? So you're going to tell me, well, it was a wedding and there was probably some music and it was loud. And that's true. There was music. I don't know if there were instruments. There may possibly were instruments, but there was definitely singing going on. Interesting. I read that most people sing la, 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 but it seems that night the townspeople decided to have a little fun and mock Yaakov. And they sang Leah, Leah, Leah. We know it's Leah and you don't. So there was music. So he couldn't hear. Okay. But look at the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. It was morning. That means that they had spent an intimate night together in a quiet room. How is it possible that he did not recognize her voice then? The wedding was over. And now we're going to learn the depth of Rachel's sacrifice. Not only did she give over the secret signs to Leah, she actually lay under the bed the entire night so that when Yaakov spoke, she was able to answer in her own voice. And she did this so that there was no chance that Leah would be embarrassed. And the deception occurred. Why would Rachel do this? She had everything to lose. This was the man she loved. This was the man that she waited for 7 years. We know that ultimately she married him also, but she didn't know that was going to happen. She knew that there was a Torah law that said that there's an issue with somebody marrying two sisters. In giving over these signs, she basically was understanding that there was a chance she was never going to be married to Yaakov. So why did she do this? Because she was one of the strongest women in all of history. She had incredible inner strength. On the morning of her wedding, she had the life she had always dreamed of. It was within her grasp, right in front of her. And yet, she also had right in front of her the reality that her sister would be absolutely humiliated in public in front of the entire town. And so she had a choice, and she made a decision. Not only to give up her beloved, but in doing so, she understood that there was also a very good chance that her father would now marry her to the evil Esav, and she'd be relegated to a life married to that evil person. Stop for a moment and think what this means. This is not a storybook. This is not a fairy tale. What did this mean for her? She could have so easily done the bare minimum. Let's say her father said, I'm switching, and she didn't have a choice, and he said, you're not allowed to say anything. She could have just not said anything, not tell anyone there were secret signs. Yaakov would have wanted the secret signs. Leah wouldn't have had them. The plot would have been foiled, and it wouldn't have been Rachel's fault because no one knew there were secret signs. But she could not stand by and let her sister be humiliated. She couldn't take the chance that her sister would be humiliated, so she subjected herself to laying on the floor at night under the bed and witnessing what must have been absolutely torturous for her. And now I want to go back to our original question. Why did the story of Yaakov and the blessings with his father have to happen in such an uncomfortable way? Well, let me bring you back to the morning so that you can hear the conversation that took place according to the Midrash. And behold, it was Leah, and he said to her, daughter of the deceiver, why have you tricked me? And she said to him, why did you trick your father? When he asked, are you my son Esav? You said, I am Esav, your firstborn. And you asked me why I tricked you? Weren't you a trickster as well? Did you ever stop and think what Yaakov's reaction was when he woke up? Wouldn't you imagine that he would be angry not only at Lavan, but at Leah and at Rachel for deceiving him? He had every right to be angry, to feel humiliated in front of the whole town. He had every right to feel betrayed. He had every right to feel that he couldn't trust these women and to find it almost impossible to forgive them. Unless there was a time in his life where for all the right reasons, he felt a need to trick someone, to be involved in a deception. Perhaps only someone who had once been in those shoes could understand and find it in his heart to forgive them. God runs the world, and he prepares us sometimes. He gives us the opportunity to obtain the strength that we're going to need to overcome obstacles that we are going to have to face. And then we have a choice. We can react with anger. That's easy. I mean, he was humiliated in front of the entire town. Maybe now he's remembering back, what was that song they were singing? Leah. They all knew? They were all in on it? He could have chosen anger, to be hurt, to withhold forgiveness. The same way that we can when we are hurt and embarrassed. Or we can choose to recognize that we actually grew from a previous difficult experience, and we can use that difficult experience to draw strength now and help us make a better choice in the future. Do you know those people who did that? They were faced with a difficult life circumstance. I do. Do you know that woman whose child was diagnosed and she had to spend weeks and weeks, almost more than a year, going for treatments in Sloan Kettering with her child? night after night, lonely, traveling back and forth sometimes by herself. And she could have been bitter and depressed. And instead she made a decision that she was going to make sure that no parent had to go through this alone the way she did. She set up a network of parents of children who were sick so that they could be there for each other and they could compare notes and they can help each other because they understood in a way that other people couldn't possibly understand what they were going through. Do you know the woman who was betrayed by her husband and went through a very difficult divorce? And instead of becoming bitter, she's now dedicated her life to helping other women who are going through difficult divorces like that? I know those people. Maybe because of Yaakov's past difficult experience, that whole uncomfortable thing that he had to go through with his father, maybe because he went through that, he was able to get past this and forgive them. And so he renegotiates his contract, he marries Rachel, and he's going to work for another 7 years. So did they live happily ever after? Do you imagine that two sisters loving the same man would live happily ever after? What Rachel did was not a one-time sacrifice. It was something she had to live with every single day for the rest of her life. There were those nights when her husband would take his bed and go into Leah's tent. And maybe it would have been easier for her if she had children right away, and then she could have been taking care of her children and enjoying the nachas. But that was not to be. Instead, for the next 4 years, she stood by year after year after year and watched Leah have child after child after child. And she watched her husband Yaakov playing with his children in her own backyard. And to top it all off, when she asks her husband to pray for her so that she can have children as well, he gets angry and he seemingly yells at her, "Am I instead of God that I prevented you from having children?" I'm sorry. This was his destiny. This was his basher. This was his other half. One could legitimately ask, where was his compassion? And why was this happening to her? I mean, didn't she make the ultimate sacrifice? Some say the conversation between between Rachel and Yaakov happened like this. Rachel said to Yaakov, "Pray for me, like your father prayed for children when his wife couldn't have children." And Yaakov said, "Yes, but my father at that point didn't have children either." So she said, "Okay, pray for me like your grandfather Abraham prayed for Sarah to have children, even though Abraham already had a child." And Yaakov said, "Yes, but Sarah made a really big sacrifice. She gave her maidservant to Abraham." At this point, Rachel could have said, "Are you kidding me? I mean, didn't I give it the office? How much I sacrificed? I don't even understand. You can't pray for me?" But that's not what she did. Instead, she understood that you don't get to say things like that. We don't get to control the circumstances of our lives, but we always get to control our reactions. And she realized that God was presenting her with yet another challenge. And she understood that it was time for her to grow again. And so she gave her maidservant to Yaakov. But I have a question. Let's look closely at the words of the Torah. Am I under God? Why these words? Why with anger? Where was his compassion? It feels like he deserts her in her hour of need. Take a step back. Anyone observing the story from the beginning is probably asking, how did this whole thing happen? I don't get it. I mean, Rachel lived the charmed life. She was the beautiful daughter, whereas Leah had the swollen eyes. She was the one who was destined to marry the righteous person, as opposed to Leah. She was even engaged for 7 years to the handsome, to the strong, to the righteous Yaakov. How did things get so turned around? I mean, she was the happy child. She didn't have a care in the world growing up. And maybe because she didn't have a care in the world growing up, she never had any reason to pray for anything. And so when she turns to her husband, who loves her dearly, and she asks him to pray for her, his answer may seem cruel. But if you understand what true love is, then you understand that you do what is ultimately in the best interest of the person that you love, even if it seems cruel at the time. Like the loving father who sees his little girl running across the street with all of her friends to the ice cream truck. And he grabs her arm and he yanks her back and he twists her arm. How cruel! But because this girl was only 5 years old, she couldn't see the car speeding around the bend the way her father could. So he pulled her back to save her life. Yaakov's answer seemed cruel, but he knew that she needed to pray. She needed to learn how to cry out to God in a way that she could never do if she felt that he had her back and he was going to pray for her. She needed to learn how to cry for her children. And it was this difficult experience that taught her how to cry for her children. And we benefit for all eternity. Because how many of you have been to Kever Rachel, which is where Rachel is buried? She's not buried in the family plot. She's not buried with Yaakov in the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. Why? Well, maybe because she died on the road, so therefore she had to be buried on the road, and that's where Kever Rachel is, on the road. And I'm going to say to you, really? Because Yaakov died down in Egypt, and he asked his sons to carry his body back so that he could be buried in Ma'aras HaMachpelah in the family plot. Why couldn't Yaakov take Rachel and bury her in the family plot? Because everything happens for a reason. And she was buried on the road. Because many, many, many years later, when her children, when the Jews were going into exile, when the temple was destroyed, this was the road that they traveled on. And they passed by her grave. And they prayed that she could intervene on their behalf and help them. We are told that Abraham prayed and said to God, in the merit of the fact that I was willing to sacrifice my son, won't you let my children return from the exile? No answer. And Yitzchak prayed. And Yaakov prayed. We're even told that Moses prayed. And the words are, he said to God, wasn't I a loyal shepherd to Israel for 40 years? I led them to the desert like a horse. And when the time came to enter Israel, you decreed that I would die in the desert. I couldn't even go in. And now they're going into exile? Won't you listen to my crying over them? It was at that point that Rachel steps forward. Because when Rachel prays, God has no choice to listen. He has to listen. Here are her words. Master of the universe, she said to God, you know that Yaakov loved me most, and he worked for my father for me for 7 years in order to wed me. And when the time of my marriage came, my father switched my sister from me. But I didn't begrudge my sister, and I didn't let her be shamed. If I, who am only human, was able to overcome my natural instincts of jealousy in order to not let my sister be humiliated and not let myself, I didn't get what I wanted. I looked at her and I wasn't jealous and I instead focused on her. Then how could you, the eternal, living, compassionate God, feel envy when your children worshipped idols? Immediately we're told that God's mercy was awakened and he said, for you, Rachel, in the merit of your prayers, the merit of what you did, you can wipe your eyes, min kolech mi bechi, ve'enayach mi dimah, because there will be reward for your actions and there's hope for your children. And because of you and your prayer, your children will return to their borders to Israel. And because you have not even begun to understand how great Rachel was, you need to hear what happened next. Reuven, Leah's oldest child, found these beautiful flowers in the field, and he picked them and he was bringing them to his mother. And Rachel didn't have a son who could bring her flowers. And she saw those beautiful flowers and she wanted them. And she traded her night with Yaakov that night for those flowers. And what was Leah's reaction? Well, let's look. Hama'at kachtech, is it not enough that you took my husband? Now you want to take the flowers of my child? I'm sorry. Who took whose husband? Didn't Leah take Rachel's husband? How could Leah say, is it not enough that you took my husband? There's only one way that she could say that. You know how when you do a favor for somebody, they feel indebted to you? It's not such a comfortable feeling to feel indebted to somebody. But they did you a favor, they put themselves out. So you feel, and you're grateful, but you feel a little indebted. And it's not such a comfortable feeling. You know the best way to do chesed, to do a kindness for somebody? If you can do them a favor in a way that they don't even realize it was a big deal for you. They don't even know there was any sacrifice on your part. Then they don't feel so indebted. What Rachel did is she gave over those signs to her sister Leah, and she didn't even let Leah know that this was a sacrifice on her part. Maybe it went something like, oh, Daddy wants us to switch. Oh, then there are going to be signs. So here are the secret signs, so you'll be okay. All right? Have a good day. It had to go like that. Because if Leah had any idea what a sacrifice this was for Rachel, there's no way she could have said, it's not enough that you take my husband. Because she would know that she took the one that Rachel wanted as a husband. And what was life like for Leah? She too is considered one of our great mothers, one of our four mothers, right? Because she had tremendous strength of character, and she displayed it throughout her life. Yes, it's true. She got the good husband. That's true. She didn't get married to Esav, but her life was not easy. She knew that Yaakov loved Rachel. Day in, day out, she got her nights with Yaakov, but Yaakov lived in Rachel's tent. She gave him child after child after child, but she could never earn his love the way he loved Rachel. It could be debilitating, it could be depressing, especially considering that we as women know that one of our strongest desires is to be loved and to be cherished by somebody. And so we observe Leah in awe, and we learn. When her first child is born, she names him Reuven because God saw my suffering. But she's still optimistic. She doesn't give up hope. She does the best she can under her circumstances. By her next child, Kishama Hashem, because Hashem is hearing me. So she said, okay, Hashem, you saw me. That's a little bit from further. You have to come a little bit closer to hear me. So maybe, God, you're coming a little bit closer. When she has her third child, now my husband will accompany me. But by the time she has her fourth child, she realizes that she will never be the one that is cherished the way we all dream of being cherished. And so she chooses to focus on gratitude for what she actually does have, her children. She chooses to thank God, Hapamodeas Hashem, with this fourth child. She thanks Hashem for giving her this child, even though she knows she's not going to get what she most wants. But perhaps the greatest strength of character that we're able to see in Leah is when she's pregnant with her seventh child. And she realizes that since Yaakov is going to have 12 Shvatim, 12 tribes come out of him, and they're going to be the progenitors of the Jewish people, well, she's already had 6 sons, and her maidservant had 2, and Rachel's maidservant had 2, and Rachel had 1 son, so there was 1 more son that was going to be born. And if her pregnancy was going to result in a boy and she would have this 7th son, that meant that Rachel, her sister, would have only 1, whereas the 2 maidservants had 2 each. And she knew that that would be hard for her sister. And she could have so easily said, well, you know what? She got the good husband, so at least I should get this. But that's not who Leah was. And so instead she prayed to Hashem, to God, that this child not be a boy, so that that last boy could be born to Rachel, her sister. True inner strength. What is fascinating is that in describing what Rachel did, it is not described as kindness, as chesed. It's not described as mercy by giving over those signs and staying under the bed that night. The word that is used to describe her incredible character trait is tzniut. Tzniut, tznius. We think of tzniut as something like dressing modestly, how you dress, or sometimes you could act in a tzniistic way, which means you act in a modest way. But that's actually not what the word means. It comes from the word tsanua, which means hidden. That's exactly what Rachel did. She hid the I, the me, the self, in favor of somebody else. It was truly the midah of tzniut that she displayed, subjugating the me and the I for someone else, hiding me behind someone else's needs. Shakespeare coined the phrase for jealousy. He called it the green-eyed monster. Well, I do not know what color eyes jealousy has, but I do know that it's a natural instinct that dates back literally to the beginning of time, to Chava, to Eve. And I do know that if left unchecked, it can become a monster that can consume a person in any time period. And now we know from the stories brought to us in the Torah that at Leah's moment of need, Rachel overcome her natural, strong inclination of jealousy, and she sacrificed everything, heroically sharing her husband with her sister. And when Rachel was desperate to have another son, it was her sister Leah's determination to overcome her own wants and desires and instead pray for a miraculous switch of a child. These two sisters, in summoning up their inner strength to overcome their own natural, very natural feeling, instinctive feeling of jealousy in favor of the other, they created the Jewish people, us. And they ingrained in our spiritual DNA the ability to summon up inner strength and make choices each and every day to overcome our own natural selfish inclinations and act appropriately. Because as the title of this class said, if there was ever a time to be jealous, and yet. And so we learn from the Torah about our great ancestors, about these biblical heroines, and perhaps we were entertained somewhat. But most importantly, we realize the inherent gift of wisdom that Torah gives us and enriches our lives. May we always have the strength of character to stretch out of our comfort zones, make the decisions that allow us to grow, to overcome those natural instincts such as jealousy, to become the people that we truly wish to be, and ultimately reach our potential and fulfill our life's missions. Good night.